Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill. Welcome.
Welcome to Wednesday. We love being with you here on Wednesdays when we get to real talk.
Yeah, we do. We love it. Mainly because we have so many ideas kind of floating around in our head from just like conversations that we have with people and with you and things that are happening. LinkedIn is very active in food safety and like what's happening out there and what's happening with leadership, what's happening with food safety culture. And so we are always just hearing little things that we can't wait to bring to you and hear your thoughts about it and get your perspectives and hear your questions and hear what you're doing around it because like I don't know, I enjoy it.
Of course. And I love today's topic.
Yes.
5 ways to deal with a bad boss, because this has come up over and over and over in our coaching, in our
Yes.
group sessions, in conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
And to clarify, when we say bad boss, we don't mean like they suck. We mean they're not being the leader you need them to be.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think there's a really big difference, because I think we become comfortable, or we become, we just, well, this is how it is.
Right.
Become complacent with where we're at and how we are in relationships. When
Mm-hmm.
really, like, your boss, your leader is there to take care of you. Like,
Yes.
you should be their number one priority.
Absolutely. And if you're a leader and you're like, man, my team is not my number one priority, right? Like, we need to have a conversation because they definitely should be. And I
Mhm.
love it when you talk about like, what does it mean to be a bad boss, right? Or a bad manager? And, a lot of times I hear that, like, man, they're such a great person. I love hanging out with them, or I feel like we're friends, but at work, or just all the things that a manager is supposed to do, right? They just don't
Mhm.
do it. They do not do it well. And when I think about, I have one particular manager in mind, um, but they were such a great person, right? And it's like everything is amazing about this person.
Mhm.
It's just those leadership skills, right? I think the big thing is that they did, and we're going to get into it, but like
Mhm.
the big thing is that leadership skills does not happen overnight. It doesn't happen just because your title changed. It doesn't happen just because someone left the organization. Now you have this team. It doesn't happen just because a magic wand is waved around and said, now you are a leader, right? Like it just doesn't happen. And it actually takes a long time to develop those skills and practice to develop those skills. And
Yes.
so, really, when I think about my experience, it's more around the organization just did not prepare them for the role.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important uh, distinction, because when we say bad boss, I mean, we're talking about a whole range of things that come up
Mm,
from, oh my gosh, they are completely toxic, like
yeah,
they're a bully, all the way down to they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know that they are supposed to be your advocate. They
yeah,
don't know that they're supposed to, like, right? Just what are the things?
hmm,
Yesterday, I was talking with someone and they're like, oh, I love my boss. They're such a great person. They're not available for me. I
mm,
get it. We run so lean. We have such a big workload. Like, if I need their help, I call, and they're like, "Is this really important?"
yeah,
And
yeah,
I paused, because I thought, we're, as leaders, we are here to serve our team members.
hmm, yeah,
And the thing is this wasn't a one-time thing that this person had shared. Like, this is something that happens over and over, because schedules are jam-packed with meetings, people are firefighting, people are leaders are doing versus leading.
mm,
And then it leads to this space where it trickles down all the way through everybody under their team.
yes, yes,
So,
yes.
so,
You
and
know,
I'm curious, for those listening, like, have you ever had a mediocre boss or bad boss? No names, like, protect everybody. But drop a yes or a no in the comments, or an emoji that maybe describes your experience.
yeah, because I'm curious about that because even as we explore what a bad boss mean, right? It could mean that they're toxic, right?
Mhm.
And really, I've had people around me that are toxic that I didn't even know was toxic till after I left the organization, right? So I've also
Yeah.
been there where I've left and people are like, I don't know if that person was really an advocate for you the way that I felt like they should have been, or whatever it happens to be. So those exist, and the ones where it's like great person, poor leader, right? Just don't have the skills. Some people feel like they do have the skills, right? Like we haven't talked about that person where it's like, I feel like I'm a great leader, or other people in industry, like I know we've seen this, right? Other people in industry is like, oh my God, this person is such a great leader. And everyone underneath them is like, I don't know about that. I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Yeah.
But I bring that up because even if you're thinking, I think I'm a great leader, right? Or, I've done some leadership training. Maybe it hasn't been in a long time, but I've done some leadership development. I think I'm a great leader. I would say check on it. How often are you getting feedback? How often are you making sure that you're checking in, that you're not starting to slide off of the great leader? Because that happens, right? Like people start as great leaders and then they stop learning, they stop developing, they stop, it's like, nope, I've been here for 10 years, for 20 years.
Yeah.
And then you realize there's new generations coming in, the industry has changed, what we're offering and what our consumers want is different. Like different people around you have changed, even though you haven't. And we sort of lose that spark, that charm, right, that we had earlier.
Yeah. And, along with that, one of my favorites is when I run across things like, well, my team just runs themselves.
Oh, yeah.
No team runs themselves. And if they do, they're running, but not as a team.
Right.
And that's a sign of disengagement. And once again, stepping into servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important. Here's why. We all know people leave bosses, not companies.
Yeah.
And over, we keep hearing it's hard to find good people to work for us. It's hard to keep people. Yet, who's investing in building better leaders that put people first? Like truly putting people first.
Yeah.
And learning to have better influence skills so that they can have better outcomes. Instead, people are like, it's not working here, we jump ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about like really investing in that and truly ensuring that their leaders are putting their people first, that's not sign up for identify a course and sign up for it once a year, right? It really is integrated into the way that you are doing business. We talk about it even from a food safety standpoint. Like you are prioritizing the things that's a part of your business, that those business partners, right? That's like, this is how we lead. And if you're not leading that way, right, everyone knows it, because the organization almost rejects you for not really being a part of the culture. And that happens in good cultures and bad cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even the bad culture will reject good
people, leaders,
right? Good leaders. So it's like so you want to, which side do you want to be on, right? Do you want to be that good culture that rejects bad leaders, right? And also help them, right, lift themselves up and grow if that's what they want to do. But that you have to be intentional.
You do.
You have to do that intentionally.
Becoming a better leader doesn't just happen through osmosis or by watching people. I mean, you can move ahead, but it's going to take you longer. It's going to be harder, and it's going to be harder for your people.
Yeah, it is.
And careerbuilder.com did a study and showed 58% of managers said they didn't receive any management training. Like, think about that for a moment. 60% of people out here leading, yep, I'm a leader, I have direct reports. They've been promoted because they were good at what they did and not because they were good at making people around them better.
Right. That's a good question too for you all. When you were promoted to your first leadership role, did you have training before that?
And training or like sustain? Like I'd love to know more about that, because like right? I mean, I've sat through conflict management, better communication, using the STAR method, right? Like these
Right.
random things that aren't pieced together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean like in my head, I'm thinking like true um leadership development,
Yeah.
not one where there's this concept here that you could apply,
Yeah.
or there's this concept here that you could apply, right? Think about it type thing. More around like, no, this is what leaders look like. This is how they take care of their people, right? It starts with mindset. They create psychological safety for their people. They build trust. All of those things. I would say I didn't get that before I became a leader.
Oh gosh, no.
Well, mainly because I was the leader within the first year of an organization too. So I came from a technical field, right? You all know that I'm an engineer. I came from engineering, chemical engineering that had nothing to do with food. In my curriculum, in my background, I worked on food. I didn't work with food at all. And then now I'm in this space where, I'm leading a second shift operations team. That happened pretty quickly, right? And so, luckily, I don't know, personality wise or whatever it is, I'm on the side of that. I have some innate things, right, that just mesh with the culture I was in. But if I didn't have that, or imagine if I had so much more, right?
Yes,
What type
that's
of
the thing.
impact I could have made.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about bad bosses, we always want to do the caveat. Not all bosses are bad. In fact, most of them that we even call bad, like have really good characteristics.
Yeah.
But there are things that maybe like they disrupt, they interfere with progress, with relationships, with retention, engagement, meeting KPIs, all of those things that are important for food safety culture.
Yes.
And so I think as we even talk about bad bosses, like we know we could do a whole show on like how to be a better boss, which we do a lot. But we also want to talk a lot about the other side when you're on the other side of a bad boss.
Yes.
Like, what do you do if you're experiencing, a boss or a leader that you need and want more from?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And of course, we're doing this because that's what we do. We help build better technical leaders. Yeah. So many people out there, like, how many degrees and certificates do you have for food safety or HACCP or PCQI or some GFSI certification or, put the alphabet soup behind it.
Right.
But now I want you to pause for a moment and think, how many degrees and certificates do you have for leadership? Mm-hmm. There's often a very big difference in those two things when we talk to people in food safety and quality, and we know because we've been there. Yeah. And the gap between okay food safety culture and great food safety culture are the leaders that are valuing people, that are having different conversations, that are investing in developing leaders. And that's what we do at Catalyst. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what we do here.
Absolutely. And we truly believe that, and we have seen it, right? Like, I love the way you put it. Like that gap between an okay culture and a great culture it's leaders.
It is.
There's
a reason why there's a book called Good to Great.
Right. It's leadership, right?
And that's why we talk about this all the time, because we know leadership through, like, I love Franklin Covey. I love John Maxwell. I love Tony Robbins. I love like all these different people who we think of with leadership. Yeah. But bringing those concepts to us here in food so that they're practical and relatable, those folks aren't able to do that as well. And I know because I have done their programs. Mm-hmm. But what helps is when we're in this space where we help translate and make them practical, make them something you can practice tomorrow. They are all relatable at Catalyst. And that's why we are the leading partner for these technical programs, development programs for your teams.
Absolutely. And it's important when you think about yourself, right? And it's right in line with this topic on how do you deal with a bad boss, right? Because like in these situations, having strong leadership skills will determine if you're going to sink or swim during that time, right? And we know that having a bad boss is common, right? Some of the data we looked up is that Zippia surveyed about 2,000 people, and this is what they found that they dislike most about their boss. So we're curious if it lands with you.
Oh yeah.
almost 25% of people reported micromanaging.
Mm.
Yeah. Boop.
Yep.
Right. 16% said unavailable, right?
Oh, yeah. Like, oh, hey, I need you. Almost 1 in 5 people say when I need my boss, they are unavailable.
That's wild. That's why, I mean, you told a story, right? That you of someone that you met where it's like, my boss is not available.
Yeah, that's why open door policies don't work. Like, oh, just come get me if you need me. You have to be intentional.
You have to be intentional about it. 13% said their boss is incompetent. They simply don't know what they're doing. Or parts of their role are simply unknown to them.
Mm.
I would be curious too about this statistic that sometimes when we talk to leaders who are not, are not doing a great job right now, a lot of their people feel like that they don't know what they're talking about, but it's because they are not great leaders is the reason why their team feel like they're incompetent.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because those are blind spots.
Yes.
And as leaders, self-awareness is one of your most powerful tools. So when you know that you have those blind spots, you can help fill these places so that you don't have 13% of your people thinking you're incompetent.
Right, exactly. And it's funny because we like just thinking about how we're promoted early on in our career. We're promoted because we are competent, right? And we show all these ways that we know what we're talking about. But as we become leaders in an organization, then that kind of flips because you are no longer the technical expert. So people aren't looking for you to spout out things, right? About the line or about data or anything like that. They're looking for you to do something different, but they still tie it to your competence.
Yeah, they do.
Which is interesting. And another reason why you need to focus on your leadership skills.
Which is maybe why one of these, in another survey by Inc. magazine, they said 26% of bosses were perceived as power hungry. Like they were just trying to move up the ranks.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. And then the last one I'm going to share, well, maybe one of the last, is even Harvard Business Review did a survey and said 58% of people say they trust a stranger more than their own boss.
Wow.
Almost 60% of people would rather trust someone I've never met than my own boss, the person who's supposed to be advocating for you, supporting you, like championing you on to meet goals and be your well-being and be the best version of you that you can be.
Right. Yeah. They're your advocate. They're supposed to be your first advocate, right? At the organization.
Yeah.
If your manager is not on board, it's hard to get the rest of the organization on board to promote you or to give you a different opportunity. So the fact that over 58%, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Don't feel like they could trust their manager. We're missing out on a whole lot of opportunity and potential, right? And productivity and profit and all the above that we talk to you all about all the time.
So hopefully we've set the stage here for why this is important. Like for you to be able to help navigate through when you have a boss that isn't as supportive. Because once again, Gallup says almost half of employees in the United States have quit jobs at some point to get away from their boss. You might have loved what you're doing, loved the company, loved the people you were working with, but to get away, and I'm in there.
Yeah.
I quit to get away from a boss because they clearly were not going to change. And so I left. And we know that there is a clear correlation between employee engagement and the relationship with their boss. So when we talk about food safety culture, when we talk about KPIs like retention and promotion potential and engagement, all of these things can be related or go up to your boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and they're human too. So I think we always have to remember our bosses are human. They right? We've been in these shoes. We're not perfect. We don't always understand. We have blind spots. Those things are real. And so the things we want to walk through today, the 5 things are like, how do you help navigate for you, but perhaps even help your boss?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Dr. Wood. Welcome.
Hello.
So glad you're here. And you're right. They might not trust their manager because they're aware that their manager is untrustworthy. Absolutely. And that, that also brings up that as a leader, there could be things along the way, right? That you're just chipping away at that trust.
Yes.
right? And then even as you think about, and we're going to talk a little bit about it in these 5 things, is that if you're dealing with a manager that you don't trust, now what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we should dive in.
Let's dive in.
Right. So the first thing is when you have what you have is a bad boss or something going on, the first thing is really, is it just you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we love
Right. So we've all had those moments like, is it me? Is it you? Is it them? How do we discern between, is this behavior directed to me personally, or is this something that applies to everybody?
Mm-hmm. That's important because that's going to help shape the rest, right? And we always start with mindset. We always start with ourselves. Let's take a look at me. Is it me? Like you said, like, is it pointed to me, or is it the way I'm thinking about the situation, right? Asking yourself the question, how are you contributing? Even if it's intentional or not, how are you contributing to the situation?
Yeah. And I think even if we see this happening just to us or to others, like all of that is good information to have. And it doesn't negate the fact that it's a behavior that we don't like and needs to hopefully be modified. But I always say it takes two to tango. Yeah. And so on some level, like that self-awareness of what's happening here. Or even we talked on another show about even having a pattern of perhaps bad bosses.
Yes.
Because sometimes what are the things that help us know? Is it them? Is it me? What parts do I play here? And what do I need to look at is a really important part when you are thinking about dealing with a bad boss or even like difficult people.
Mm-hmm. And this is important to start with too, because there's always a learning, right? Mm-hmm. Like when I had my opportunity of a bad boss, that's clear in my head because that's when I learned, my communication style and how to mold to others. And just some things that I learned about myself as a leader, that if I did not take a moment to take a look at myself, at how I'm contributing, how am I communicating, how am I doing all the things that I'm doing, right? Like how am I contributing to that situation? I don't think I would have learned as much from that situation that had, made me a better leader into the future. That hopefully also made them a better leader.
Yeah, exactly. So examining first, and we, like you said, we always start there.
We do.
We that, right? Isn't that our new thing? We're like, be the catalyst.
Right.
Like
right.
You be the catalyst and look, like I be the catalyst. So,
and that's important too, like from a mindset standpoint, but this relationship with your manager, whether you stay in it or not, is not going to change until you make a decision, until you do something different, right? Until you decide that, okay, I want to have a different relationship or I want to do something different. Your boss might be living their life thinking about something else, right? Probably overworked and, don't want to be here either, right? So you have to make the decision that you want to do something different, and you can't control what they do, right? So you really have to think about, what are my actions, right? And how can I help the situation? Otherwise, it's not going to move.
Yeah, and I love that, because if you are hoping it changes or you think it will change, or oh gosh, what if I word this email slightly different? Or what if I show up to this meeting like this instead? Will it make everything change? I don't know, maybe. But recognizing that you have power in this to see change that you want to see is so important.
Absolutely. So once you get there and your mind is like, yes, I can do something about it, or I can make a ripple, or I could do something. I could be that catalyst. Mm-hmm. Then we move on to number 2, right? On find where they're most disruptive for you. Mm-hmm. And then structure around it.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, even with almost all humans, it's not that we just like everything about them, but usually there's a couple things that kind of bubble to the top that are like, oh, those rub me. Or those aren't working for me. So I love that idea of like, can we narrow down and say, what is the thing that's actually being disruptive for you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then how do you help, right? How do you build that structure, right? How do you build the process or whatever it happens to be? When I think about situations where we had a really strong team that we had built and we now have this high credibility, right? People are listening to us, we feel good, right? No one's giving us crazy pushback. And then with a new manager coming in, like that's what we felt like we didn't want to disrupt, right? Like everything else behind the scenes, like we can get through this, right? But we did not want to disrupt the relationships we have built with others because that took so much off of our plate, right? Like we didn't have to go through and have conversations about why it's important, right? Like why food safety is important, why you can't do it this way, all of those things. We had now built that credibility in that trust in those relationships to say, if we're like, that's not the best way to go, let's talk about a different way, they're all ears.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure that we were not just protecting ourselves, but also protecting our counterparts, that they're not going to run into any roadblocks along the way. And so like,
Helpful.
I remember me and the team, like us actually talking about this one on like, what is the most disruption could come from? And then how do we help? How do we build that structure? What do they need to know, right? Some people just like want to be in everything because they want to know, they want to feel comfortable so that if someone asks them questions, they're ready. So we didn't know, what is it that you need to know? How do we help you learn about a new area? But how do we also help you be the leader in the area and give information to people as they come to you? We're happy to give you this information. We're happy to have conversations. We're happy to sit in on calls. We're happy to do these things. And we built that structure because we didn't want that disruption.
Yeah. And I think that disruptive part that you talk about often it revolves around communication.
Mm-hmm.
So we even had someone in boot camp who had a new leader who they were just having a heck of a time with them because they would just randomly call and be like, oh, have this done by tomorrow, or where is this information? And it was really disruptive for their workday because they never knew when it was coming. And then all of a sudden, they were done at the end of their workday and something's due at 7 the next morning. Well, guess what? Right? They're going home, having dinner and breaking out their computer to get something done in this fire mode. And really what it moved into was asking questions about like, well, when does it come up? How does it show up? What could you do to perhaps like it's not counterattack, but like put something in place, be more proactive for what type of things they're looking for or keep them updated. Like, what does that look like so that there's some communication so this person maybe isn't experiencing as much of this disruption to their work schedule from their boss.
Yeah. I love that, the counterattack, because sometimes it does feel like that. It feels like, man, this boss is going to come in, right? They're going to, we used to say to one boss that would come to our facility and they're a tornado. They really will come in and like swirl everyone up and then leave. And then everyone's like, oh my gosh, like crazy stuff. This person said we can do this, but can we? And then we have to bring them back down, right? Like we have to calm the storm, right? But it's like we prep for that. Oh, this person coming in, of course we want them to come in and have conversations and stuff. But how do we make sure we give them a structure around conversations, even like even updates on like, well,
like
this
agendas.
has been communicating.
Yeah, just that planning.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes people are like, oh, but that's more work. And we expect our boss to know.
Yeah.
Like, gosh, why don't you know you're disruptive? Or like, why do I have to like micromanage? Why do I feel like I'm being micromanaged? Then when I have things
managing up, right?
It is managing up. And it is something like, gosh, if they're calling to find out, are you going to have it done this week? Or what's this happening? Well, maybe you start the week off by sending them an email. Here are the 3 things I'm working on this week.
Mm-hmm.
That way they're like, oh, I don't have to call you till Thursday.
Right.
But these are the things that disrupt us that may appear like a solution may appear to have more work. Mm-hmm. And maybe it does for a while as you establish a different cadence or something different comes up. But it also, this is one that starts with you.
Right.
Are they disruptive for you?
Asking that question, right? How can I help? Or, even asking that question on what do you need to know? Right?
Yeah.
Like what do you need to know? How do I help you in your role? How do I help you what you need to do? What information can I provide for you?
Which goes into number 3. Like when we feel like we have a bad boss or we have this, we're trying to manage up, how do we seek to understand?
Yes.
How do
Yeah.
we learn more? Because there's often this gap of what they're looking for and what we're seeing.
Mhm.
And so how do we close this a little bit further so that we have better alignment with our boss, or at least maybe understand where they are, even if you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that's where I want to be.
Right. Absolutely. And that's so important, even as Mike brings up trust, right? This person is untrustworthy because they have other priorities, right? They have other things that they're looking at. If you understand what those things are, now you can make different decisions, right? Now you know what to share, what not to share. Now you know, okay, I need my manager's support on this. He's probably not going to support it because, I don't know, it doesn't get him into the C-suite. But I'm going to now tell these people around him. So he will have to know, right? He will have to be a part of those conversations. Now you can get a good game plan together once you understand, right? And that takes time to seek to understand it.
It does. And that's why I love when we walk people, especially through boot camp, they go through the 3 Ps with us, Catalyst 3 Ps. That's how to help improve relationships that are personal, professional, and priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we've found is that relationships tend to perhaps lean in one of those areas, but it's not balanced or necessarily in all.
Yes.
And so we work with someone who's like our BFF at work, and it's probably a lot of personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right, we're doing a lot. And yes, we're getting work done. But how often are we like, what do you really want to do with your life? Like, what are your priorities? Oh, that's not my priority.
Right.
But now think about even with our leader. Like, how do we step into a space where we understand what are the other things on their mind? Mm-hmm. What are the things that they wish would be different? What are their priorities? Where do they hope to go? I don't know. Is there a place for you maybe after they leave, or you go with them, or you're going somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's that motivation, right? Like what's motivating them in their personal life, in their professional life, and how they get work done, which is their priorities. And you understanding that will help you with the how I can help, because now you understand what is their priority. You know, I was talking to someone, you know, I've been in an organization where there's been acquisitions and there's been shutdowns, right? And people have come in to the organization, have been there for a year or so. And then this thing is happening with the organization. And I hear things like, oh, that person is not very trustworthy, right? Or there's just something off about that person, you know, and some of these things probably they just couldn't say, right? Because it's confidential at the time. But if you understood their role in the organization, it will make so much more sense. So like later on, hindsight is 2020, right? You think back and you're like, oh, I see. That's what that person was planning on doing. That's what that person needed to do. That was their job to do. So it seemed like that they were being untrustworthy, but in reality, they were doing their job. And that's an extreme case, but everyone has this case in the business. Everyone does. Everyone has their own priorities, their own role to do. And so it's important for you to understand not just yours, but also your managers, because that's what they are going to be trying to push to get through. Mm-hmm. If it is not on your priority list, right, they might not ever talk to you about it because it's not on there, right? Like you have to understand those, and you have to be intentional about understanding those, so that when you bring up PMs one more time and they ignore you again, you at least understand that this is not the message that they're even sending up to their boss and to the rest of the organization, right? Yeah. So maybe you can pivot and understand what their priorities are and say, oh, well, you know, you want to stop foreign material. This is how PMs play into that and will help you get your goal. Now that disruption doesn't look quite like a disruption anymore, because now you have the magic solve or the solution that also helps you with your priorities. So those are things that we talk about, you know, in boot camp and bring up around just relationship building, because that's what it's leading to, right?
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, when we know more about people and we see more of, like, we're more alike with what we're doing in terms of priorities and alignment, that helps us have stronger relationships and helps us appreciate our differences and
Yeah.
respect those. And when we can do that, it's harder to have conflict with people that you understand. I mean, you may not love maybe their perspective, but if you understand their perspective, at least you have a platform to be able to build from there.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So
And
now
I
you
think,
kind of had your mindset, right? You finding what is most disruptive. You're starting to seek to understand. And then number 4, lean into giving feedback and asking for what you need.
yes, yes, yes. I always think leaders are not mind readers.
Yeah.
Right. I've been on teams early in my career, right? I remember being in the lab and being like, how could they not know what's going on here? Blah, 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 blah. Well, of course they don't know what's going on. We've never told them.
Right. They're not here every day like us, right?
No. And I've seen elements of that play out in different relationships of people we've worked with, people in boot camp, where they're like, well, I just wish they would do this. Well, have you ever asked them? And the answer is usually, well, no.
Yeah.
So, how do we expect people to know what we need when we aren't able to communicate that to them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, we talk about this, we talk about influence a lot. It's throughout boot camp and our other programs. But when we think about influence, we spend so much time talking about the why, right? Instead of actually talking about what inspires them, what do they value, right? Like, what are their beliefs? We spend a lot of time trying to explain the whys to our manager, but we don't understand what is their motivation, right? And what are their values. And so, like, when you talk about, like, they don't really know what's going on here, they don't really know what's happening, we haven't really had conversations with them outside of the things that are bubbling up, right? Or the things that are bubbling off of our plate. And so when I think about leaning into giving feedback and asking for what you need, that's so much more than just the why, right? That's so much more than the rational persuasion behind it. It's the values,
And beliefs. Yeah.
it's beliefs, right?
You have to connect into that part. And I think even if we use a very elementary one, like let's say taking a temperature, like we can tell somebody all day long, this is why it's important to take a temperature and to record it and why it has to be between this temperature or greater than this temperature. And they're going to be like, okay. But now if you're like, we've all done this in food safety. Okay. Have you ever known somebody to get sick from something, right? From foodborne illness? Like temperature could have been one of the things. Like, what was that like for them? What did you see? Like that inspiration, like you can help prevent that by doing this.
Absolutely.
Like that's a whole different conversation. And, we all talk about different conversations is what builds a different culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, even when we talk about, giving and receiving feedback, which is another module in boot camp, we talk about having this full conversation. And a part of that, instead of saying, you know what, you're a terrible boss, and this is why, right? Like, that's feedback. But, a way to give feedback is really to first start with asking,
Yeah.
How do you think our relationship is going? How do you think the team's doing? Right? Like, asking those bigger questions around them so you can get their perspective on it, and then being able to give them true feedback, right? Like, you might say, oh man, I really want to give them a feedback about, not really being involved with the lab. And then you have conversations around, like, what do you think about the lab and the structure there? And they're like, you know what? I used to spend a lot of time in the lab, but about 5 years ago, my boss gave me feedback that I should not spend as much time there. So I haven't spent much time there. And sometimes I feel disconnected. Now your feedback looks different, right? Your insight looks different, where you can say, yes, I feel that too. How can we help close that gap?
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And so sometimes it's that perception.
Mhm.
Like I remember early, once again, kind of early on as part of my learning, where my team was super busy, right? They were quality managers in plants. Like we called them, we laughingly called them part-timers if they went home after 8 hours, right? Because they had something else going on. So there were parts that I would take on and do because I thought it would lessen their load.
Mm.
And then I had somebody go, well, you keep doing that part. Like, that's the part that I want to do. And I'm like, I had no idea. I thought
Yeah.
I was being helpful and doing some of the groundwork to bring it forth to my group. And they're like, well, no, we actually want to be involved in some of that upfront work.
Yeah.
So those are the things where we need people to really step into. What do you need? Like, I need to know more about the whole process.
Mhm.
I need to have some consistency in how this communication works for me to be better at my role, for me to be able to see how the outcomes relate. It's okay to ask for what we need.
Mhm.
And too often we defer or we're passive or we don't truly understand what our need even is,
Yes.
kind
Yeah.
of masked as something else. And so this really takes some self awareness and leaning in to be like, okay, what part of what they're doing isn't working and what do I need them to do differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I ask them in a way that is open? Like, would you be willing to try this?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I would say that you communicating your need is critical
Mhm.
to a leader because leaders have blind spots,
Yeah.
right? Like if you didn't know your team didn't want you to do that part of the work, you would have continued on. And
I
then
would have, and they would have been in the background, like
yes,
feeling beaten down or
yes,
disengaged, or that they weren't worthy, or I didn't trust them. And none of that was true.
right.
I was just trying to be helpful.
Right, exactly. Right. And it's like these blind spots exist on all of us, right? And we don't know. That's why they're a blind spot, right? We don't know that they're there. And
Yeah.
so that's why feedback is so important. It's important for us to know how to give it. It's important for us to know how to receive it because that's how we make our blind spot. Like if we had a huge blind spot, right? That's how we like get it smaller, 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 because we're getting feedback, we're hearing insights, we're getting perspective. And as a leader, you're hearing what your team needs.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one thing. If you have not done this step yet, like, oh, is it me? How am I contributing? Right? Like, yep, I seek to understand. If you haven't leaned in, right, and given that feedback, like this is where you are. You're on step 4 right now. And it's so crucial to be able to do that, just to be able to be a strong leader.
Yeah, because your leader, your boss, does not know what they don't know.
Absolutely.
You've got to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
Which,
Absolutely.
I think even when you ask for what you need, right, there are going to be times where your leader may be like, corporate policy says we can't do this, or this process says we can't change this, or, there might be something, or maybe they're unwilling to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they can't do it. Who knows? Whole host of things. But I think that leads into number 5, that at some point you have to determine what part of maybe their style or their behavior you're willing to adapt to and live with.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that really ties into number 2 on like what's being disruptive, like how are they being disruptive? Because then you're able to take a look at and say, okay, this is the most important things. Do I really care that they have this new agenda style, right? Or, new template, or I don't know, maybe you do. Maybe that should be a battle that you fight, right? For me, for that situation, for my team, that wasn't, right? Like if there's another agenda template that you want to use for our team meetings, we support you, right? We support you. We can, if that's the best way to communicate to you, we support that. So knowing like what styles are you willing to adapt to, also knowing your own boundaries, right? That's why we start with mindset. You understand you, then you're able to have better conversations, right? You're able to mold to someone else's style, which is big even from a leadership standpoint. You as a leader, right, being able to do that is big. And that's why I talk about too, like having a bad boss, there's so much to learn from and to practice. And this is one of them. How are you adapting to other styles?
Yeah, because we'll never completely mesh with any other human. I mean, some more than others, but there'll always be something where it's just not our preference.
Yeah.
And so I think discerning between which ones is just like, gosh, I can live with that, or if you're like, that's the last straw. So you need to really understand what you need to walk into that.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is important, because then the next part is, we hear people are they're like, well, I've tried everything. What do we do next?
Yeah. So
And
it's
I want to
important.
make sure, because I'm trying to be mindful of our time, because we always could go over.
Yeah, we do.
Make sure we get
before we move on, I do want to, like, if you're out there, you're taking notes, I do want you to hear what those 5 things are.
Okay.
Because we are going to transition and just talk about, like, if you've tried these things, like, what is the next step? Because we all know, like, sometimes you've done them, right? And you got to figure out what else to do next. So the first one is it you? Really taking a look at yourself, your mindset. How are you contributing, right? Is this a pattern for you, or is this something that everyone's sort of dealing with right now? Where is it most disruptive for you? And how do you build structure around it? By offering to help. Number 3 is seeking to understand. And if you've been through boot camp, you'll understand our 3 Ps on really building relationships and building that, those relationships with your boss and with others, so you can really understand their motivations, right, for where they are. 4 was lean in to giving feedback and asking for what you need. We spent some time there. And then 5, determine what parts of their style you're willing to adapt to.
Yes. And I love that. Those are the 5 things we would recommend starting with. But if you have tried everything, what's the next step? The first one, I labeled it navigate your own ship. And that's really about your attitude, your feelings.
Yeah.
Because like we said, there is likely no human that we're going to spend all our time with that we are going to love every aspect, every day, in every situation and ecosystem. So where do you want to? Can you? Would you like to perhaps build compassion and live with this boss, and recognize that you get to label and classify how it's affecting you?
Yeah.
So I love this classic example. I think I've shared this before with my kids. They're teenagers. They're still learning things. And they'll be like, so-and-so made me angry. So-and-so did this. And I'm like, no. You are the one cultivating those feelings.
Yeah.
Even though there is something that they have done that is rubbing you wrong, that is not aligning with whatever the picture in your head was, you're still the one cultivating those feelings that are moving you to something.
Yeah.
And so while this is a big one, right? Like if you have somebody who's irritating the heck out of you, to be like, how do I let that irritation pass?
Right. Yes.
That's huge. We're not trying to minimize it at all, but hopefully offering up a perspective that we don't often talk about in like normal circles. Like we own these. We get to choose if we want to respond, how we want to label it, how it's going to play out.
And how we're going to respond, right? You can respond with a smile, right? You can decide, right? Decide that it's not going to ruin your day, not ruin your moment, not ruin your week, right? You can decide that yourself. You
decide happy.
Decide happy. Yes. We have a friend that wrote a book, decide happy, right? Like you can do that. And that's really navigating your ship, right? Because there's so many of us that as you walk through those 5 things, like Jill said, you might not align on everything. And that might be a-okay, right? That might be okay to be like, we're about to go into this meeting. I know we don't align. I've done a pre-meeting, right? I'm ready for my after meeting, my post meeting. But in this meeting, I'm going to be open and I'm going to be curious and I'm going to be, I'm going to be happy, right? And I'm going to smile and I'm going to make sure that I'm here all in it. That's what you can do.
And I think, when you do that, and they're totally understand, there's going to be times where you're like, I want to seek support from somebody else. And
Yeah.
often we'll think about HR is supposed to be there to help us navigate sticky situations.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
really lodging a formal complaint, we're going to give you some information about, is this something you want to do and why?
Because that could be your after, right? Like
It
where
could be.
my boss at this point, I need to talk with someone else. I need to complain, right? I need to put in that formal complaint.
Yeah. And I think the things here for consideration is that, we talked with Brian last week, Brian Armentrout, Food Safety Chat. Listen to that on Fridays. HR is typically there to protect the company. So if you go to them and say, gosh, I have a sucky boss, and you spew off the list of things that maybe are going wrong, like they want evidence. Like they're thinking, oh my gosh, if this advances further, what do we need to do to protect the risk of our organization? That's
Right.
their role.
Yeah. Which is so important as you think about this being a possible next step. They're going to want that information, but then also like sometimes your boss talk to HR a lot more than you do. So they know HR a little bit more than you may. And so you have to navigate that, right? And the evidence might need to be pretty substantial because HR knows them, leadership knows them, everyone knows them, right?
Yeah.
And then you have now introduced another perspective that maybe they hadn't heard about before or have heard very little about.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing. Like when we were you all know we do a little prep before we come on, but and I really thought it was really something worth considering. It said, in the absence of compelling data indicating a pattern of bad behavior, HR is likely to side with the other people. They'll take the boss's side. And even somebody who had reported they originally had some issues with their boss and took them to HR. Well, their boss was really good at self-promotion and persuaded HR that this other person was in fact the problem. And so there's also kind of this, I'd love to say this never happens, but we've all heard the stories where all of a sudden the person who, right? Like all of a sudden they're the ones that are being scrutinized, and you have to be prepared for that.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a big thing. Being prepared for what the possibilities are, because it's not going to necessarily be roses.
Right, exactly. Like when we were talking about this, I shared that when I had an experience of a bad boss that sticks in my head, that was probably the most I talked to HR. So much so that they thought I was going to quit. Right. So it's like was it like super heightened in my mind? Probably not, but they thought they had some information that they thought was starting to escalate on my end that I was going to leave the organization. And now one thing that was interesting about that is that like you're so concerned about me leaving because of this bad boss, but you're doing nothing to help this bad boss.
Yeah. Right? Well, like, they're protecting the company, right?
Exactly. And that's a perfect example on like, well, now you're having conversations with me because you think I'm going to quit, when talk with that manager, you know what I mean? Like talk with that manager. But the thing of it is that it is, for whatever reason, right? Like we're not in HR. I'm not in HR. For whatever reason, it's difficult for them to have the conversation the other way. And that's just something to keep in mind. And also thinking about who's in the boat with you. Because if you're the only one having a complaint, is it you? Is it them? We don't know. But if you have people having those conversations, and unfortunately, I was talking to someone who was like, my manager just got let go as a part of restructuring. We have been complaining about him for 2 years. And so they took this opportunity as a part of restructuring, right, to eliminate his position. But now we have no position. We have all these, we have all these things that's now falling on me. And so it's like, it's like, should I have even just not even talked about this person, right? Like I'm having this conversation with her around it because it's as if she's been punished because of this person wasn't a good fit from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah. And
But
I think that's the part, like to think about what are the possibilities when you've like, I've had enough, I need to do the next thing. Like just consider and maybe talk to people or look for different, the perspectives on what these things could play out as. That way it's like a risk assessment. Like what are all the options? What are all the things I can do? And what are all the risks and things could go wrong?
Absolutely. And when I think about that, right, and I'm thinking about those risks and formal complaints and how I'm like bringing those to the forefront, which, I've kind of alluded that I've done that before. It's because of this third option, right? Knowing when to jump ship. Mm-hmm. I know that at some point I'm going to have to, like, if this situation doesn't clear up, I'm going to have to leave because it's either showing me that, like, I'm not valued, right? Or these are the type of leaders that the organization promotes, which is important if you are a leader and you're thinking about, man, we do have some bad bosses around. If you're promoting people that do not have leadership skills, you are telling other people in the organization that's the type of leaders you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't want to work at an organization that promotes these type of leaders. So my mind was already going to like, I need to look out for when is the right time for me to jump ship.
Yeah. And I think that's always important because at the end of the day, the person who's going to be looking in the mirror saying, is this something I want to put up with? Is this something I want to go through? Is it something I want to battle? Is you. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to feel really good and confident about where you're going and being in your power to know what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you find all those answers. You feel good about that decision when you walk through those 5 steps that we talked about earlier, because you've done the work, right? Like you built the relationships, you put some structures in place, you've had the conversation, you've given feedback, right? Like you've adapted to where you can adapt to, like you've done all the work, but the organization is really not supporting you, right? Or that sometimes people are stuck in their ways, right? And they're not going to do anything different. And that's okay. Maybe that's just not the organization for you.
Yeah. But we also understand there's a very practical side. Sometimes we have to tolerate where we're at because of other factors in our life and in our situation. And so we are very mindful that that's real and that exists. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we also talked about sometimes it's how do we even shift how we view it so that it's really about, can we ease our suffering?
Yeah.
Like we don't need to suffer through it. How can we ease our suffering if it is something we have to tolerate so that we can still be the version of ourselves that we love and can and be with in our well-being?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah. I think that kind of leads us to our last point, and is that get support, right? Like if you're in this situation where you are dealing with a bad boss or you think that you might be that bad boss, right? Like get support, get what you need to improve your leadership skills, to help your boss improve theirs, to help navigate through. We talked a little bit about boot camp throughout, but that's because boot camp is perfect for those leaders that's also dealing with a bad boss. And it's because you're bad. We talked about earlier, your bad boss is human. They're a part of your team. And when you really take a look at them in that way, then how you manage them is not really that different to how you're managing the rest of your team. They just have different priorities, right? They just have different priorities. They have a different network and a different area of influence. Mm-hmm. So does your team. They also have a different area of network and influence that's different than your own. And so when we talk about these leadership skills and needing these leadership skills, right, in your role, like we mean it and we're passionate about it. And that's why Catalyst is here. And that's why we partner with people and organizations and technical experts so that they can be technical leaders. So whether it's us or someone else, like get that.
Go with us, right? Practical, relatable, progressive. Because I also want to point out, boot camp is only step 1. Because the things you do today are not the things you're going to do in next year or 5 years or 10 years down the road. So if you're looking like, how do I stay on this path of being an intentional leader? How do I grow so I can better manage up? Whatever those things are, like we have an entire journey to support you in this.
Yeah,
And
because
that's why we partner with HR teams and organizations who are like, we're committed to having a program that's year after year to develop our leaders as they move, as we have new people, as we promote.
yeah.
That's the missing piece.
Yeah, and it's so important as you think about our topic today, right? And as you think about dealing with leadership and the statistics we read earlier, like, can you imagine if those leaders had a program that was built specifically for what they're doing in their work and it's relatable and practical, right? Like, that's definitely will impact those statistics, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're like, oh, I can't wait, I'm ready to jump in. Well, guess what? Boot camp starts tomorrow.
Yes.
And enrollment is open for next week as well. Because we often have people, they're like, oh, I missed the date. Can I still join? Yes.
Absolutely.
We do extend it 1 week, but then it closes. So if you're listening in, and yes, this recording will be available. So if you want to share it with others, certainly do that. And if you're ready to take the next step, then jump on out to our website, foodsafetycatalyst.com, and go to our programs and sign up for May Bootcamp and get started on your journey, because you can be the catalyst.
Absolutely. And
I know it's cheesy, but you are the catalyst.
You are. You truly are. It's it's behind our name. And if you can't find the information, shoot us an email and we will make sure that we send it to you, because we don't want to see any more bad bosses, right?
No.
Like if we're going to push food safety culture forward, we can't afford to have bad bosses like this. We can't afford for people to trust strangers over our bosses, right? Like we can't afford that if we're going to continue to push forward in food safety culture.
Yep.
So
if we have lean teams and we can't find time to work on things, we can't be micromanaging.
right.
Right. Those are the things that keep us from having the capacity we need. So all of these things are related.
Absolutely. I mean, like, oh, I thought you were busy, but not that busy.
Yeah, because you're just doing half my work again. Yay.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so, and we're going to be back here next week, same time, same place. And we have an amazing guest here. Zah Lewis is joining us, and she is a brilliant narrative storyteller coach. We can't wait to share her with you. So.
Absolutely. So we will see you all next week. Have a great rest of your week. If you're celebrating the holiday, have a happy holiday weekend. And we'll see you next week. And we'll see you in boot camp.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye.